Dr. Abdul El-Sayed is a physician, an epidemiologist, public health expert, and progressive activist. He ran for governor of Michigan in 2018 on what I love is an unapologetically progressive platform, advocating for universal health care, clean water for all, debt-free and tuition-free higher education, a pathway to 100% renewable energy, and to rebuild the barriers between corporations and government. You know, those things that we keep praying for is sacred in our faith, making sure that that's the message that our government should represent. Before running for governor, Abdul served as health commissioner in Detroit, where he rebuilt Detroit's health department after it had been privatized during the city's municipal bankruptcy. He holds a doctorate in public health from Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar, as well as a medical degree from Columbia University. So, Doctor, please share with us today.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That's actually pretty good. Most of the time, you get to this point in the program and folks are like, giving a very weak. So I'm going to try it one more time because I know we can do just a little bit better. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm deeply thankful to the organizers here at Muslims for Peace for inviting me to spend some time. I open up my remarks in the name of God, with peace and blessings on our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I can't speak today without mentioning a moment in recent history that I know is likely weighing heavily on many of our hearts. Just 9 days ago, 50 lives were stolen from us across the world in New Zealand for doing nothing but choosing to come and pray. And we can reflect on the verses that talk about Salatul Jum'ah. فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. When you hear the call to prayer on Fridays, come hurriedly to the remembrance of God and leave your business aside. I hope that it gives us peace and succor in a moment like this to remember that these were people who had come together over nothing less but remembering their Creator, remembering God. And we know that in our tradition, we don't consider those who pass in the way of God as having died. Rather, we believe that they are with God and that they are getting His sustenance. A sustenance that we all know is far greater than anything we could imagine in this world. Right now, though, the question, it falls to us. Because their trial, their test in this life, it's over. The question is how we respond to it. And yes, we feel pain and we feel sorrow and we feel grief. But there are other emotions that sometimes try a heart in moments like this, and sadness, and they are grievance and anger and hate. And we have a choice about whether or not we will respond to grief with grievance. But let's remember that we are a people who believe always in justice. One of the verses in the Quran, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا اعْدِلُوا هُوَ أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. And do not allow people's hatred to keep you from doing justice. Do justice, that is closest to taqwa. We, in moments like this, have to remember that our responsibilities do not change. That the feelings of grief cannot turn into grievance. That we have to engage, step forward rather than stepping back. I ran for office in 2018. I'm one of many Muslims who chose to do that. Hundreds, they say. Offices as small as school board to as large as governor. Now, when I was invited, I wanted to make sure they remembered I'm not the one who won. But the organizers, they said something smart. They said, the ones who won have a job to do. You don't. So come on over and speak with us. So I'm honored to be here to share some experience today. Now, when I decided to run for office, the biggest pushback that I got was actually in our own community. They said, Abdul Rahman, by the way, your name is 11 letters long, Abdul Rahman. You pray 5 times a day, you've got a beard, your wife wears hijab. There is no way that you can win any office. Not governor, not dog catcher. Shouldn't even try. But I've been reading our history, and that history of the work and role and engagement of Muslims in this country, it is long. Starts in 1527. Estevanico of Azador. Anybody heard that name before? You know, they say if you want to cut a people off from their future, you cut them off from their history. 1527, he was a guide. It's the first recorded Muslim in these lands. Estimates suggest that more than 50% of those who were brought to this land without choice in the matter, stolen from their lives, forced into servitude as slaves, more than 50% of them, estimates suggest, were Muslim. Bilal Yafulia, know that name? Veteran of 1812, a freedman, fought for this country against the repression of the British. And when we forgot our truths, we had people like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali to remind us of those truths in the 50s and 60s. The role of Muslims in this country is long. Let's not forget that. And I also know my own history. And that history starts 1400 years ago when Imam Ali radiallahu anhu writes a letter to his newly appointed governor in the state of Egypt. And he tells him in that letter, Nahj al-Balagha 53, if you want to look at it, he tells him, remember, when he's talking about the way he ought to govern, remember that these people are either your brothers in faith or your equals in humanity. Today, 90% of the residents of what now has become the Republic of Egypt are Muslims for that reason. My father was one of them back in 1978. 243 years ago, another side of my family was here when a group of men, all white, all landowners, came together in a place called Philadelphia, not far from here, and they planned the founding of this new country. Now, its founding reflected a particular aspect of that moment. All white, all men, all landowning. But the ideals that they ensconced in their writing, in the founding documents of this country, were far bigger than the limited demographics that they had in mind. And they wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. My father left that country of Egypt in 1978. He was the eldest son of the wisest, most intelligent human being I have yet to meet in my life. She was my grandmother, Su'ad. She never got to go to school. Raised 6 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment overlooking a fish market where my grandfather sold vegetables. He had an 8th grade education. My dad knew that if he was going to walk a different path than his parents, he was going to have to do it differently. But his path started where they had left off. He would start his days in that fish market, putting up the stall where my grandfather would sell vegetables. He'd then go off and study and learn with his classmates, just to come back after class was over to break that stall down, just to put it up again the next day. And by the time he'd be done with his chores, the sun would have gone down. They only had 1 bedroom where his 5 siblings were sleeping. So he would study by the light of a lamp across the street from the rooftop of their building. He studied that way night in and night out, and he earned himself an opportunity to go to graduate school. And his opportunities were to go to one of 2 places. One place was called Bayreuth, Germany. The other place was called Detroit, Michigan. My dad now, he was somebody who did his homework. And he learned that in Bayreuth, they were like 30 years past Nazism. And my olive-complexioned Muslim father named Muhammad, he looked the other way. He said, you know, maybe Detroit's going to be the place. And so he took a bet on this country when he came here back in 1978, 41 years ago. He had gotten married, met his wife by phone. They got married, had a baby, and quickly got divorced. We call that in this country a one-hit wonder. And I was the one thing that they created out of that relationship. And they got divorced, and they both remarried. And my father met my stepmom, Jackie, a daughter of the American Revolution, born and raised in a place called St. Louis, Michigan. And here's a hint. If you've heard the name of the city, but it's in the wrong state, you know it's a very, very small town. St. Louis is literally smack dab in the middle of our state. There's a plaque in St. Louis that commemorates the fact that it is the geographic center of Michigan's mitten. Her family's been here since before the revolution. And so I was raised in the house built by Muhammad and Jackie. Just to give you a sense of my home, I want you to imagine walking into my house on that most American of holidays, which is, of course, Thanksgiving. So you walk into the house, the first thing that you see is that the Lions are playing and losing on TV. And then you see the turkey. It's on the Thanksgiving table. My grandma takes care of it because if my dad got his hands on it, it tastes like Egyptian food. And then you've got my folks. You met my dad already. He's a professor of engineering. He's also an imam. He leads Salat al-Jum'ah at various masajid in southeast Michigan. Then you've got my grandma Judy, who cooked the turkey. She's a nurse who trained at Hurley Hospital in Flint. And she's also a deacon at her Presbyterian church. And then you've got my Uncle Piot, who married my Aunt Jenny, my stepmom's sister. Uncle Piot, he came to this country under very similar circumstances to my father from a very different place. He's from Warsaw, Poland. And he teaches Slavic languages at the University of Michigan, and he's an avowed atheist. So you can imagine my Thanksgiving table is like the beginning of a bad joke. You got an imam, a deacon, and an atheist. But here's the thing, you know what they're always talking about? Why it is that the Lions always lose on Thanksgiving Day. That's the family I grew up in. Now, in a family like this one, I'd spend half of my summers in Alexandria hanging out with my grandparents, aunts, and uncles, and then come back in the middle of the summer to go to a place called Montcalm County, Michigan, where the other side of my family's had a cottage on a lake for the past 70 years. And here's the interesting thing about it. Doesn't matter if your grandmother never got to go to school, raised 6 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment, or your grandmother's a nurse who raised 3 kids in the middle of the state of Michigan. When your grandmother kisses you on the forehead, tells you to eat a little bit more food, or in my case, eat a little bit less food, or tells you you're being an idiot for whatever it is that you were doing that morning, it is done with the same love. Doesn't matter which grandmother it is. That love is human love. And for me, every time I'd get on an airplane to go 12 hours with a stopover in Schiphol Airport, anybody who's done that flight, right? It's the Schiphol stopover in Amsterdam. Those 12 hours, I would be traveling about 10 years difference in life expectancy. Here's the crazy thing. If I were to start from that same house that I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit and drive 20 minutes south on I-75 into any neighborhood in Detroit, I would travel that same 10-year life expectancy gap. And I knew growing up that I wanted to do something about that problem. That was the issue that called to me. And as I thought about what I wanted to do, I knew I loved people. And in my house, both my parents are engineers. Science was just the language we spoke in our house. And I knew I loved science. So I wanted to use science to help people, and I thought I'd become a doctor. Now, started out at Michigan, and I got some good advice from a friend. He said, look, you should study what you love. You get to med school someday, but you study what you love. So I started taking classes, and I decided I was going to study biology and politics on my way to going to medical school. Now, I came back home after that first term, sat down with my dad, started to explain to him what I wanted to do. He just looked at me for a minute. He's like, Wallahi, you are very, very confused. And when I told him I wanted to run for governor, he was like, you are very, very confused. But here's the thing. If biology is a set of rules by which our cells make complex decisions about scarce resources in our bodies, politics is just a set of rules by which society makes complex decisions about scarce resources. And the fact of the matter is, the decisions that cells make don't change if you're talking about Egypt or suburban Detroit or urban communities. What changes is the politics. So I progressed through my studies, I went to medical school, and I realized that the work had to be about addressing not just what happened in the clinics and hospitals that we had dominion over as doctors, but instead asking ourselves about the politics that shaped who got sick and who didn't before people ever got to those doors at all, if they even had access. One thing led to another. I left clinical medicine, and I got the opportunity to rebuild Detroit's health department when I was appointed health commissioner in the city of Detroit. I was the youngest health commissioner in a major U.S. city, and I had what was probably the hardest job in local public health. My job was to provide basic goods and services to 700,000 people who'd been systematically marginalized and neglected since our government made the choice to shut down a 185-year-old health department in a city with a higher infant mortality rate than my father's native Egypt. Walking in first day, walking into a department that had 5 city employees, 85 contractors, in the back of the building where people pay parking tickets in Detroit. I didn't know this. So I'm walking in first day, and I know I look a little bit young. I looked even younger before I decided to run for governor. And so I grew up my beard a little bit thicker. I put on my big boy suit and my big boy tie, and I'm getting in the mindset, you're the commissioner, you're going to commission. I have no idea what that means, but I'm going to do it. And this guy walks up to me from the right. Hey, you. Yes? You work here? Yes. Yes, I do work here. Great. Can you take my parking ticket in for me? I was like, no, I'm the health director. He's like, why are you walking to the parking building? I said, that's a really good question. So I took his ticket and got it paid, felt really good about myself for about 10 minutes, and then realized I had no clue what I was doing. Spent 3 weeks trying to figure out what we were supposed to do. We were understaffed. Our department hadn't received a raise for years. We were in the back of the municipal parking department. And on my 3rd week of work, I met the answer to my question. Walked in to a vaccine clinic that I had been visiting in the form of a 3-year-old little boy, 4th child of a 21-year-old mom, met his father maybe 4 times in his life because his dad's in jail. But this kid, he had this incredible confidence. Now, I don't know if you've ever met a 3-year-old you've never met, right? But the first time you meet most 3-year-olds who don't know who you are, they look up, realize they don't know who you are, and then bury their face back in their parents. They don't want to see you. Kid didn't do that. Walked right up to me, gave me a big hug, shook my hand, walked back to his mom, and I'm sitting there dumbfounded. This kid's either the most confident or the most rational 3-year-old I've ever seen in my life. But I couldn't help but contrast his circumstances to the realities of that confidence. If this kid graduates from his decrepit, underfunded public school system in the city of Detroit, his probability of winding up in jail remains substantially higher than it does of going to college. And I realized that the work we had to do was about justifying the kind of confidence that any 3-year-old should have in the life that he or she is going to lead. And so we set about to break down those barriers. We thought outside the box. We did things like build a program to guarantee every child a free pair of glasses delivered at school within 2 weeks of a vision test, when we realized that 30% of those kids who'd get tested in the beginning wouldn't get a pair of glasses. They'd come back testing positive again next year, meaning we knew they needed a pair and they didn't get a pair. All in, that program's delivered 600,000 pairs of glasses. We stood up to some of the biggest polluters in the entire state. When a Marathon petroleum refinery in southwest Detroit, the hardest hit part of our city with asthma, we stood up when they wanted to raise their emissions of sulfur dioxide, despite the fact that the EPA had said there's already too much sulfur dioxide in the air. We forced them to invest $10 million of their own money to reduce their emissions when they had wanted to increase them. And then we heard about Flint. And I want you to understand where I was when I heard about the Flint water crisis. I had just finished inspecting city schools. I want you to imagine walking into a first grade classroom. It's the middle of winter in Michigan, 11 a.m., and these kids are bundled up because the boilers in their buildings don't work. You start looking around their classrooms, you see dead mice in the corner. They didn't just die, they've been there for days. You smell the mold coming out of the floorboards in the gym where those kids are supposed to be able to play. And we realized that given the state of our schools, it was possible that our kids might be exposed to the same lead that we were hearing about in Flint, in the single place where we systematically concentrate them most of the day, most of the year. So we put together a protocol. We had every school, daycare, and Head Start tested for lead in the water, tested all 360 buildings in 6 months. That protocol is now model practice for how you test schools for lead nationwide. But here's the thing. Every problem that we took on, every single one, led us to the door of a politician. And I'll tell you what, those doors don't open up when you're talking about the well-being of children. They always open up when you're a corporation with a check to write for a politician. I was watching what was happening in Flint. I served on 2 statewide boards around the crisis. I realized that our city wasn't willing to move on some of the biggest issues Detroit was facing, the fact that we shut water off on 20,000 homes every single year. And I watched Donald Trump get elected president. And at that point, what do? That's when I resigned my job and decided to run for governor. But I told you what the reaction was from our own community. Our community hasn't been reading its history. We don't appreciate how far we have come because of how long we have been walking. And we forget that the ideals that we believe in, they're not just not mutually exclusive to our American identity and ideals. No, they are mutually inclusive. When we talk about a society being built on a set of ideals, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. When we talk about our responsibility to our equals in humanity, those two are one and the same. We do not have to apologize for who we are. We have to remember who we are. I was raised reading about my history as an American and reading about my prophet as a Muslim. And one of the things I learned was that the way the Prophet ﷺ engaged the world was that he became an embodiment of his message. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمْ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Verily, I was only sent to insist upon the best of good character. If you had to reduce the complexity of the message of our faith, of everything we know about our Prophet, about our Quran, it would come back to that in his own words. And so I said, if I'm going to run for office, my job is to embody what I believe in who I am to the best of my ability, because that's the prophetic way. Spent 18 months, I met people in their VFW halls, in their union halls, in their living rooms, in their communities. I got to listen to their challenges, understand where they were coming from. And one of the most beautiful things was that I realized that it didn't matter if you were talking to poor or working black people in places like Detroit or Flint, or poor or working white people in places like Kalkaska or Marquette in the Upper Peninsula. They came with the same challenges. Asked basic questions. Why is it that in a state that is surrounded by 21% of the world's fresh water, do I have to pay so much to get water if it's even not leaded in the first place? Why is it that in a society where we pay 19 cents on the dollar for health care, that 10% of my community doesn't have health care at all? Why is it that my kid's school looks exactly like it did when I went there? Why are we privatizing our public education system at all? These questions, they bring people together. The problem, though, is that we have forgotten that all of us together, we are what makes this country what it is. We have fallen prey to a logic that tells us that we cannot see eye to eye across the challenges that we face. But our faith and our American ideals have always been about coming together. This year, we got to watch not one, but 2 Muslim American congresswomen. They, with their hands on a Quran, swore an oath to protect a constitution One was wearing a Palestinian thawb, the other wearing a hijab. That is a moment I hope you don't ever forget. And across this country, hundreds of public officials took the same oath to protect and defend our Constitution. Who knows what the first three words of that Constitution are? We the people. Thank you. What's your name? Maliha? Maliha knows. We the people. I want you to think about what that means. It's not just a statement. It is a call to action. We the people implies that we come together, that we have done this work of coming together. Who knows what the next 5 words are? Malia, you got them? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. I want you to think about that for a second. In order to form a more perfect union. There is a logical fallacy in that statement. How can you be more than perfect? You ever thought about that? How can you be more perfect? Perfect is an absolute state of being. To be more perfect is not in the outcome. To be more perfect is in the process. In the process of doing what? Coming together as we, the people. Our name, the first word in the name of this country is united. We got a lot of work to do. My argument to you today is that as Muslims, we are not privileged in this moment to have any other right but to do what it is that our Prophet ﷺ would have done. To do what it is that the founders and framers of this constitution and this country would have done. Not out of our need to belong to something that we perceive ourselves as not belonging to, no. Out of our responsibility to the creeds that we believe in, both as Americans who believe in we the people and as Muslims who believe in our equality and our responsibility. اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى. Seek justice that is closest to God conscious. Our opportunity today is to move beyond asking questions about the challenges that we face and rather ask about where we can be a part of solutions to the challenges that we as Americans face. That is the opportunity we have in front of us. We, for a long time, have focused on our political project of inclusion around simply whether or not there are Muslim elected officials. But my argument to you today is that that actually doesn't matter as much. Representation is great. And as the father of a 15-month-old baby girl who's ethnically half Egyptian, ethnically half Indian, and 100% American, I am super glad that she can look up and say, I've got Rashida and I've got Ilhan, and they look a little bit more like me. That's a beautiful thing, but it is not enough. That is not the point. If we are people who take seriously our responsibility to justice, then our responsibility does not end when there are people who look like us in places of power. No, our responsibility ends when we know that we have achieved the kind of justice that both our faith and our American identity demand of us. Right now, there are people 50 miles north of where I live who still don't have access to clean water in Flint. That is a Muslim issue. We watched as babies got ripped from the arms of their mothers on our southern borders. That is a Muslim issue. 10% of our American sisters and brothers still don't have health care. That is a Muslim issue. We are watching as inequality is hitting an all-time high. People work 2 and 3 jobs and still cannot afford to feed their families. That is a Muslim issue. If we're serious about our responsibility toward justice, founded in our faith and founded in our American ideals and identities, then racism is a Muslim issue. Then xenophobia is a Muslim issue. Then sexism is a Muslim issue. Inequality is a Muslim issue. We have to stand as loudly and forthrightly against these issues, independent who suffers them. We have to stand for them because our ideals of justice demand it. Because our Prophet ﷺ would have done it. The opportunity for us is immense. I know our backs are against the wall, that we look around us and we say Muslims are under attack. But our answer to that question should not center ourselves. Our answer to that question should come in the forms of how we engage the world around us. When we stand up and we say, I'm not going to tell you why I belong, I'm going to show you why I belong. I'm not going to tell you why I matter, I'm going to show you why I matter. I'm not going to tell you why I have rights, I'm going to show you your rights. If we're willing to do that work, to engage in the work of perfecting, of becoming we the people, then I know our future in this country is bright. And I want to finish on a final thought. I'm ironically one of those people who went to med school whose parents didn't actually want him to go to med school. So I'm probably not a very good messenger on this message, but let me try. Imam Ali said that you should raise your kids differently than you were raised, because they were raised for a time that's different than your time. Many of us, we complain about why our story is not being told, why our history is being redefined around us, being revised for us. We ask why we don't see ourselves represented in newsrooms, why it is we don't see ourselves represented among the expert class who always is asked to talk. And oftentimes we've focused on others and why they leave us out. But the question I think we should be asking is why we don't include ourselves. We tell our kids that these things are really bad, but if you want to get married, you better go to med school. And if you can't go to med school, maybe become an engineer. If you can't do that, maybe go to law school, but I don't even know. If we believe in our responsibility to this country, then we better be a part of building the future, the infrastructure that we will need to be able to benefit in all of the ways, not just some. And so as we look at our young people, it cannot just be, you should go to med school. It has to be, I want you to dream about what you want to be and how you want to solve the problems that you see in front of you. Because if we do not see our future in our kids, then we don't have a future. And so we have to build that in them. And so as your children ask you, Baba, Mama, what should I be? Be what you want to be. Be what you believe you can be a solution to a problem through. What are the problems you want to solve? What are the problems we want to solve? Not just for us, but for the broader American project. How is what you're going to do, how is that going to be a part of the work of perfecting? Those are the questions we ought to ask our young people. Those are the sets of ideals we ought to imbue them with. And I just want to leave you with a final thought. Right now, this moment is in deep flux. And one of the most exciting things about 2018, I think, is that Muslims came out to vote in droves. Why? Because we had to realize the existential threat that was Donald Trump, to realize that we actually had a stake in our future. We've got another big election in 2020. And I know Muslims for Peace is a 501c3. I am not going to endorse any candidate over another. But I will tell you something, that a lot of these ideals we talked about, they're on the ballot in 2020. Justice is on the ballot in 2020. Freedom is on the ballot in 2020. Liberty is on the ballot in 2020. And I do hope that we're going to come out and vote in 2020. Jazakumullahu khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes.